Hi, Carl here for the Right Words podcast. This is a video for those of you listening on Spotify, iTunes, or some other form of podcatcher. But it's not necessary to see me sitting here. It's just me and my mostly shaved head, my big, thick reading glasses, and my sporty, water resistant Sierra Trading Post jacket over my black long john top. And above my head, there is my TESOL and TEFL certificate. Why can't we pronounce things sometimes? Well, we're not in control of what our brain does with our bodies. That's why. And to the right, there is my Beatles poster, which I got in Floral Park outside of a bar. Remember that, Alec Minero? Uh, I wanted to make a fireside chat kind of a environment, but I don't have a fireside yet. I may never have a fireside, even if I get to live in Hokkaido, because I don't want to burn anything. Well, how are you? I wrote a letter today, a response to a letter that Dr. Richard Dawkins had written to Ayaan Ali, the former Dutch parliamentarian who basically escaped um, FGM in Sudan, way before she was a Dutch parliamentarian. She was a famous atheist, a friend of Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, of course, Sam Harris, maybe Jerry Coyne, and other luminaries and not so bright people who are good natured and trying to escape religious tyranny in the world. Um, she was born in a Muslim country or a Muslim community, of course, and escaped to Europe to become a famous proponent and activist for human rights. So Richard Dawkins was very politely and in a friendly manner, but in the way that only British people can, call out their friends for the things they disagree with. Um, and in a way, I mean that as a compliment. All groups of people can call out their friends for things they don't agree with. But in my relationships with British people, you know who you are, David uh, and Marcus, I've discovered people who can suddenly lay in the barbed uh, comments that really hurt and trigger you, even when you think you're in your best Zen Buddhist mind. Um, but Richard Dawkins doesn't do this in the letter. He's just very confident in what he says. And I want to elaborate on what I said to Richard Dawkins. And by the way, thank you, Doctor, if you happen to hear this, for making your forum open for non paying subscribers to write to you, as some other people don't allow. Even I, who makes, who make, I who make, who makes my podcasts when they have music and background sound effects and voices of famous people and so on free, as well as these kinds of things free, as well as my notes free. But the only thing I have behind a paywall is the ability for people to comment here. Or maybe I don't, because recently I got comments right here from my friend Bob in India. But I need to put up a paywall sooner or later, and that's fodder for another discussion. Um, because I need to make some money from all the work that I put into the content that I create, even if it's not something that looks like it took a lot of work in one instance. Across social media, on Facebook and Instagram, which I'm very strongly contemplating leaving because of Mark Zuckerberg's contributions to the sex offending seditionist felon who's going to take office as an authoritarian leader in the United States. I create a lot of content, or if I'm not creating that content in the week that I do a lot of work on those things, or another week, I'm maintaining it, right? And once I start working again, I'm really going to need to have compensation for what I do if people gather to enjoy it. Up until now, I don't have many followers here on Substack. I have plenty on WordPress, a place that is much more open to your creativity, but it's another annoying platform. Uh, like Facebook is an annoying platform, even though it's quite accommodating in many ways. One of the things that I like about Substack is that though it is simple and boring, it's one of the only places like Medium or Quora which enable a full text editor with full recourse to all of the uh, parts of the English language, like italics and so on, which are necessary to fully benefit from unambiguous communication. Being an ESL teacher, I know what that means. All writers should know what it means. Um, I've held a long suspicion, or I've long held a suspicion, that places like Twitter and Facebook or Instagram do not enable italics because it's better for people to have that slight loss, which carries great uh, ramifications for communication. I'm surprised. If I were right about it, I wouldn't be surprised if they took away commas. But most people don't know how to use commas anyway. Back to the Richard Dawkins thing. So I said, showing much appreciation for Dr. Dawkins and what he does, that I didn't disagree with him in telling Ayaan Hirsi Ali that there are senseless aspects of becoming a Christian after you've been an atheist, some of which, if one thinks about it deeply enough, and I'm not blaming Ayaan Hirsi Ali for this. In fact, I think I have an understanding of why politically she would join another religion, being that she's under threat from Islamists um, or jihadi would be assassins. There are better ways to describe and also to realize that not all religions are the same, as Dr. Sam Harris says. And the word spirituality is not a bad thing if you define it the way some do, as I do, which is to say that to me, and I came up with this maybe over a decade ago, spirituality doesn't have to be of the evangelical or the moderate religious type. It can be of the habit, energy, behavioral, and cognitive type. Let me unpack that. Habit energy is a concept in Buddhism which could probably be described with other language in neuroscience as those things which we become accustomed to doing. So if your habit energy is such that you are inclined to try to move toward virtue and honesty and benevolence, that's good habit energy. That can be part of a spirituality which is cognitive. Let me unpack that. Meaning that the foundation of your morals support good ethics. So, in addition to that, the the behavioral would be how you treat others. And I'm not talking about when you lose your temper and you get upset, although that can be part of it. I'm talking about what you intend and what you try to do, what you aim at, and what you think is right. I live that way in terms of what I think spirituality is. And to me, what spirituality is a core adherence to the idea that you are and should be sincere. This sincerity will come through in your words, it will come through in your actions. Again, perhaps not when you lose your temper, because I know that there are metabolic and pathological reasons why some people lose their temper even if they don't want to. And it will come through in your thoughts and behaviors. So, um, one of the best ways to actually cut right through all of the psychobabble is to say, think of a person who is getting down to soul music or disco or funk or blues, especially with blues. I mean, why is it that Led Zeppelin played so many versions of American blues tunes? Why did rock and roll grow out of blues? Because blues has a way of instigating a movement and a feeling in you in the same way that a sad philharmonic piece does. You don't have control over it. And if you start to dance, this is a nonverbal recognition of the fact that it moves you. Well, if your sense of spirituality is based in sincerity, that sincerity will uncontrollably move you to different actions and speech. All of this is made a lot easier through the Buddhist practice of mindful meditation because you're focusing on the Eightfold Path, which includes such precepts as adhering to right mind, right thought, right speech, right action, right vocation, right path, right behavior. It's different from some of the other religions, which only require that you profess or that you say that you profess, or hopefully that you really think it is true, that you feel, that you honor a certain God or another. This is more or less thought or intention. In Buddhist mindful practice, it's not enough to believe something. You have to act it out, and you act it out by incorporating it here. That's what I mean by not all religions are the same. Some people call Buddhism a religion and some people call it a philosophy. It's actually more of a philosophy, but insofar as people practice it each day and think that it is efficacious, this is belief. If you ever read any of M. Scott Peck's books, he talked about how religion is what you believe, right? I try to shy away from the word belief because I find that it is nebulous, amorphous in meaning, um, and can be a bulwark against reasonable discussion and fairness in argument. Look at my other podcasts on this service here, and you'll see what I mean, especially if you look up the series called Believe What You Want. So, what's my point here? Well, Richard Dawkins was saying to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who may or not actually deserve the title doctor, I'm not sure what her education is. He was saying to her, "You're no more a Christian than I am." And I think what he meant by you are and I am is intrinsically, spiritually, reality wise, what you really are. I don't think he was accusing her of fraud, but I think he was trying to call her attention to the fact that she's become a Christian, so to speak. She may go to church, she may pray, she may think she's a Christian, but how could she be a Christian if you look at the faith claims that Christianity requires? He didn't bother going into the bloody history, the neurosis that it causes people, or the conflicts with honesty and truth about the reality of the universe, science, and so on, insofar as particular details. But he did point out, in his humble opinion, knowing her as a friend, that she couldn't possibly actually think these things are true. So I guess in a roundabout way, he was saying, "Are you being honest with yourself? And therefore, are you being honest with others?" All I was asking Richard Dawkins to do in my very polite note to him was say that, as Alain de Botton pointed out in his book Religion for Atheists, there are benefits to the community nature of religion. And this is something that Alain de Botton was decrying, that we atheists might lack in not having a spiritual practice, which is why I have often thought that Sam Harris would be a much more equanimous person to talk to, and he's already way up there at the top. But he'd have much fewer problems with people who twist his words around and try to cancel him if he had the habit of energy of being more careful with his own words, which would happen if he were actually to submit to being a secular Buddhist. Because in Buddhism, as I mentioned before, there is the concept of right speech. Originally, what the Buddha was telling his bhikkhus, his monks, was don't lie. But the adaptation of that for modern life, while we can adopt not lying, which Sam Harris has, and M. Scott Peck had, and I have, in addition to that, you can try not to say things that are going to be harmful. Doesn't mean you don't have to tell the truth. It doesn't mean that you can't call people out for their corruption of mind or action. But it means that you don't say things perhaps that will be ambiguously misinterpreted. Maybe you don't use four-letter words or things that are going to trigger people. I happen to think that four-letter words are actually necessary, but I'm trying to cut down on them. I may even remove my previous post because I called some people morons. And while that has an effective reaction that might actually be positive in calling people to the attention of how much we want them to straighten themselves out, as the case was conservatives who elected Donald Trump, the triggering can also bring about bad emotions, bad feelings, revenge, and just add to the stress in our lives. Anyway, this is what I was saying to Richard Dawkins. Not all religions are the same. Spirituality isn't necessarily a bad thing if you define it and practice it as something that's secular and wholesome, as in operating from a core of sincerity and honesty about all things. In my case, I think that that means I have to be honest about everything, which means that I'm being immoral according to my morals if I espouse things that aren't true, because then I validate other people espousing things that aren't true, whether they be my students, whether they be vulnerable friends. Um, and basically, that was the main point. Um, because a lot of atheists, including quite highly educated atheists and luminaries like Richard Dawkins, they blame religion, or maybe they don't mean to. They tend to blame religion or paint religion with a broad brush. Nobody would say that a Jain or a pacifist Buddhist is as deleterious as a casual Christian, although they can be, right? People often adhere to a religion without actually practicing it. But America has been called a Christian nation, which it's not supposed to be, but it is largely. I mean, as Louis C.K. said, the Christians won. If you don't think so, what year is it? And if you don't think so, look at our money. It says, in God we trust. Now, there are other religions that have a God, but the people who put that on the dollar are talking about a particular one. You know it, and I know it. It's the Abrahamic God, which isn't fair to atheists. It isn't fair to Buddhists. In this case, an atheist Buddhist and a Stoic. So that's that really. Um, I don't pretend to be worthy of standing outside of Richard Dawkins' shadow, but maybe one day when I have a PhD and I've published a few books and I've said a few things that are actually more helpful than just my philosophical ideas, maybe I could stand next to him. Maybe if he's still alive by that time, we can have a conversation. In fact, as many of you know, in the future, I want to interview people here, from friends who do great things, even if not in their own opinion, to great people who do great things, like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, maybe Noam Chomsky, some of the astronauts, engineers, other philosophers, maybe you. So, what's your religion or philosophy? I am curious, but to be honest, I'm all talked out with people who belong to traditional theisms. I'd like to hear about people or from people who have done what I've done. They've adopted a religion that is not perfect in many respects, even down to the Buddhas thinking that there is rebirth, which I don't, but in which they find community and they have improved or try to improve their mind, their thought, their action, their speech, their behavior. And another thing I added to back up Alain de Bonton's idea when writing to Richard Dawkins was one of the reasons I call myself a Buddhist when I'm actually more of an atheist intrinsically is I believe that meditation is helpful. I understand its calming and medical effects or medicinal effects. And when I'm in Korea or Japan, I like to go to a temple, even though I know that maybe a lot of the people there might actually be praying, something that to me is anti Buddhist. They may actually ask for a blessing from a priest, which to me they shouldn't do. Um, so you might say, well, why do you call yourself a Buddhist then? Because there's a community for me of people who more or less embody a much more peaceful path than the other theists that I've been raised around, and then the ones who run my country. And because Buddhism actually kind of tracks parallel in many ways to physics or concepts in physics. It doesn't really contradict science unless you believe in rebirth. Um, and I can feel a connection, which is important to social animals, when I'm near temples in Asia. And it's a very civil group of people for the most part. I know there are civil, wonderful, beautiful Christians, Jews, and Muslims. Um, but it's not often that uh, Buddhists I've known are calling for the death penalty, bombing another country, although I do support our helping Ukraine throw off the 19th century and 20th century style barbarism of Putin. Um, they don't proselytize too forcefully unless you think of the Nichiren Buddhists. For the most part, they are one of the most peaceful religions, and that's probably why the famous pacifist and atheist Albert Einstein said that he thought if any of the religions got it more right, it was that one. Peace, love, joy, and enlightenment to you all and to yours. Keep changing minds, one person at a time, beginning with your own. And I'll see you next time.